Well, there are certainly renewed calls for Senate reform following the recent controversy over the misuse of Senate funds. Now, the Prime Minister, Stephen Harper's Chief of Staff, personally repaid more than $90,000 of the living expenses for Senator Mike Duffy. That these are expenses that Senator Duffy improperly claimed. Now, Senator Duffy resigned from the Conservative caucus over the scandal, and over the weekend, the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff, Nigel Wright, also resigned. Now, meanwhile, the Prime Minister just moments ago addressed his caucus in Ottawa.
I need not remind you that in 2006, this government was first elected to clean up the Liberal sponsorship scandal, to ensure the rules are followed, and to ensure there are consequences when they are not. Since that time, we have taken unprecedented measures to achieve that end. We have strengthened the powers of the Auditor General, toughened the office of the Ethics Commissioner, reformed political party financing, dramatically tightened lobbying rules, and beefed up auditing and accountability within government departments. One of the most accountable and transparent systems of governance in the entire world, and this is something Canadians are rightly proud of.
That was the Prime Minister moments ago speaking to his caucus in Ottawa. On the line now, two staunch Conservatives who spent years arguing in favor of Senate reform. Peter Coleman is the President and CEO of the Conservative lobby group, the National Citizens Coalition. By the way, Stephen Harper, you used to be the president of that group, in fact, is the past president. And Jack Weisgerber is a former BC MLA and former leader of both the Social Credit Party and the BC Reform Party. Gentlemen, good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Peter, let me start with you. Stephen Harper used to be the head of your organization and built his campaign to power in part with calls for a more accountable Senate. Why would he let his chief of staff write a personal check to pay off Senator Duffy's misspent funds?
Well, I guess that's the question we've got to find an answer to. Did Harper know about this? I mean, did Nigel do it on his own? And that's some of the things that were unanswered today. I really don't know what that answer still is, if he knew or not. But the call for Senate reform is long overdue, and this makes things even more urgent in my view.
Does the resignation of Nigel Wright say anything about this? Because it's that close to Mr. Harper? Would Mr. Harper have known about this, or would this be strictly Nigel Wright acting on his own accord?
And that's the question I think a lot of Canadians want to know. I don't know that answer personally. I really don't know. But I do find really ironic. There's no doubt Nigel Wright made an error in judgment. This never should have happened. Never should have written a check. But I find it astounding that Mike Duffy's still sitting as a senator. The time for him to go is long overdue. And Nigel Wright, if you will, took one for the team. I'm not saying it's proper what he did, because I don't think it is proper what he did. But it astounds me that Duffy has the gall to sit as a senator, even as an independent.
Jack Weisgerber, is this controversy a symptom of a systemic problem, or is this something that just comes up from time to time?
Well, I think it's systemic in so much as the way the senators find themselves appointed till they're 75, very little scrutiny, very little consequences for misbehavior. And whenever people find themselves in that circumstance, a percentage will misbehave, and we're seeing that in spades. I'm thinking, like everybody else in Canada, Senate reform is far past due. I welcome the undertaking by the Prime Minister to look at meaningful Senate reform. And I think we need to bring some fresh ideas to this thing. The old notion of the Triple E Senate, to me, is something that's past its best by date. It's never going to happen, even if we open the Constitution.
Jack, you used to be in favor of Senate elections, but not anymore. How come?
Well, I used to be in favor of a Triple E Senate, and I think that was in part us as Canadians looking at the U.S. system and looking at the strength of the U.S. economy, the strength of the country. But you know what? A Triple E Senate would be imposing a U.S. style or a French style of government on a parliamentary system, and I don't think it would ever work unless you actually were creating a third level of government, or fourth if you want to argue, municipal, provincial, federal, and then a Senate government that would in fact be out trying to function like a government? And if it's not functioning like a government, on what basis do senators run for election?
Peter Coleman, your organization has advocated for Senate reform for years. Now, we can hear in your voice that you're not all that thrilled with Senator Duffy, but also over the weekend, Senator Pamela Wallin resigned from caucus. Senator Brazeau was booted out of caucus. What does this scandal mean for your movement to reform the Senate?
I think it heightens it. I mean, I do agree with Jack. The Tripoli Senate that we advocated for a long time is not going to happen because the provinces have to buy in, and they won't. Pamela Wallin spent $375,000 in less than 3 years in travel. I mean, there's just no excuse for this, and it's amazing to me. I know Harper fairly well. I'm not his best friend, but I know him fairly well, and he's angry this morning. You can clearly see that at the press conference. But the people that are biting him are the ones that he put in place in the first place.
All three, Wallin, Duffy, and Brazeau, are his appointments to the Senate.
Absolutely. I mean, it just shows how rotten that is. And I agree with Jack totally. I mean, there's no consequences for these guys. I mean, I go back to Duffy. You consider it independent, collect your $150,000 a year still after all this. I mean, you've got a lot of moxie to actually sit there and have somebody that's actually resigned ahead of you that did a stupid thing by trying to help Duffy out in the first place. And we need Senate reform. But I would start the first place for me. It would be, even though I know what Jack's having to say, but even electing senators would bring some accountability, because I wish you could boot them out if every cycle when there's an election, that there's a chance for people to go back to their constituents and say, am I worthy of being a senator again? Because right now, it's Jack so well said, it's a job for life.
It's almost impossible to remove a senator.
Yeah.
Yeah, and term limits obviously would be a huge step forward, whether the Senate's elected or appointed. And I'm not against elections. I'm actually more concerned with the notion of trying to create another effective level of government, because I think we've got all the government we need in Canada. This reminds me a little bit about the crisis that the British Parliament went through only about 4 years ago, with members of Parliament claiming housing allowances in London when in fact that was their home. And the Parliament in Britain has done quite a lot to try and clean up that fiscal stuff. And I think the first place, if I were the Prime Minister, I'd go and see what has worked successfully in England to clean up that issue, because at the root of most of this stuff will be some fiscal misbehavior. I heard the Prime Minister talk about the Auditor General and the Ethics Commissioner, and I think that needs to be, in the short term, before we open the Constitution, I think there needs to be hugely improved consequences, and that has to be decided not by the Prime Minister. He should be the Prime Minister should be the last one charged with that kind of discipline over the folks that he or she appointed. So I think you've got to move out, either look at different methods of appointments or election, and then look at a completely separate oversight.
Peter, with politics being so much about perspective and also about optics,
right.
Is it possible right now to do anything with the Senate other than complete Senate reform to gain back the confidence of the Canadian people?
Well, I think what the Prime Minister's got to do now is put this behind him by letting people know exactly what he knew and when. I think that part's important. I don't know, if we talked earlier, if he knew about Nigel Wright writing a check or not. And I think that's a question that needs to be answered. But, I just think we are long past the Senate reform, and this isn't going to go away now because of, a press conference or whatever. The media won't let this go away, and they shouldn't. So I think we've got to get on with the process. I do agree with Jack's comments. Go see where countries have had problems and reform them too, but it shouldn't be the Prime Minister leading this charge. It should be other people, and it should be, quite frankly, it should be probably all the parties, federal parties should be engaged in this process if they truly want meaningful reform.
Gentlemen, thank you for your time this morning. I very much appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Take care. Peter Coleman, President and CEO of the National Citizens Coalition. Jack Weisgerber, former BC MLA and former head of both the Social Credit Party and the BC Reform Party. We'd love to hear what you think about all of this. Should we abolish the Senate entirely, or should we opt for an elected Senate? What should we do? Are you satisfied with the level of accountability from the Prime Minister's office on this issue?